And joining me now in studio, New York Congressman Democrat Ritchie Torres. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming in
person.
Yes, it's very nice to see you. Let's talk about New York City, because there's been an influx of, some estimates, 175,000 migrants in a relatively short period of time. New York City Council member Vicky Palladino says this: we're spending more taxpayer money to care for foreign nationals than we are on the annual budgets of NYPD, D-N.Y, and the Department of Sanitation combined. I know your reaction this week to some of the executive action by the president was wary. You don't want to be indistinguishable, you said, from Republicans. You worried about excluding or erasing certain communities of color. So what do you say to the people of color here who are your constituents, or people who live in this town who are worried about the system being overwhelmed, public safety, education? Mayor Adams says it could destroy the city.
The concerns are fair. I mean, the migrant crisis has put an enormous strain on the social safety net and shelter system of New York City. Look, we in the United States have a dysfunctional asylum system. Anyone, anywhere, can cross the border, claim asylum, enter the country, and Border Patrol has no emergency authority to limit crossings in the event of a surge. And so that's the gap that the president's executive order is filling. But in the end, an executive order is no substitute for an act of Congress. Only Congress can fix what is broken in our asylum system.
And you know, both sides obviously point the finger at each other. House Republicans will say, we passed H.R. 2. It is very comprehensive. The White House and the president will say, well, what about that deal in the Senate that you guys had together? Yeah. It seems that it doesn't matter who's in charge. This problem is intractable. It doesn't get solved.
No, there's only one party that has a bicameral, bipartisan compromise on border security, and it's the Democratic Party. We, the Democratic, negotiated a border security compromise with the Republicans. There were a number of Republicans.
A small handful.
Most notably, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader.
Who then didn't vote for it.
Who was for the bill before he was against it, and then he was pressured by Donald Trump to oppose the legislation. But those Republicans who are actively obstructing and opposing the border security compromise have no interest in actually solving the problem. Their interest is in playing politics and demagoguing the issue against President Biden. You know, there's a difference between governing and grandstanding, and governing requires compromise. And if you refuse to compromise, if you let the perfect be the enemy of the good, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Well, as you know, Republicans had a number of problems with that bigger package, many of them saying that they felt like they had no say in it. It was negotiated to a point where they couldn't go along with what was in it. But when we look at this issue of immigration, it's not good for the White House or the president. We've got new polling out this week in a number of key states, Arizona, Florida, Nevada, and Virginia. And when people were asked, who do you trust to handle immigration more? Double digits. You can see there on our screen. They think President Trump has a much better handle on this.
Look, I would encourage you to look at New York 3. So Long Island was ground zero for the red wave in New York, and Tom Suozzi was able to win back New York 3 by an even larger margin than we lost it in 2022, and he was largely campaigning on border security. So Tom Suozzi has shown that Democrats can proactively own the issue of border security, and so I don't think we should cede it to the Republicans.
Will it be enough in time? Because when you look at 20-point deficit for President Biden in these really critical states, that's got to be a warning sign to the White House. And does it then make you question, as some do, that this executive action is just a political ploy in an election year?
Look, the president is acting because of congressional inaction, right? Congress needs to do its job. And, keep in mind that the political establishment has a history of underestimating President Biden. Mm-hmm. I mean, he has proven the conventional wisdom wrong. And I suspect he's going to outperform the polls and outperform the predictions of the political pundits and the prognosticators. So.
We know they always get a lot tighter. As people actually now have to make a decision, there are third-party candidates that poll with some significant numbers, but once people get to the ballot box or early vote, they've got to make a decision, and these often tighten up. I want to ask you about all of these recent reports that are questioning the president's ability to run, to be effective for another 4 years. You've seen the polls. It's not just Republicans, it's Democrats and independents that have questions about this. The Atlantic had a really tough piece out yesterday referring to the president as sort of another Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that she doesn't know when it's time to leave, and it cost the country that seat. It cost Democrats that seat. They say this about him. It says he remains a comprehensively weak incumbent weighed down by the same liabilities that burdened him from the start, beginning with the largest and completely unfixable one. At 81, he is much too old to run for president. You said last year 80 is not ideal for the age of a candidate running, but here we are. What do you make of these reports, and do you think the president is up to another 4 years?
I have full confidence in the president. It is true that the president is old, but so is Donald Trump. It's a geriatric presidential race.
Why do you think they poll differently? Because people seem less concerned about President Trump's age.
I think there's a narrative that has set in on President Biden, but if you actually look at his record, it speaks for itself. He's had one of the most productively bipartisan presidencies in recent memory. I mean, he brought Democrats and Republicans together to provide health care to veterans exposed to toxic substances, brought Democrats and Republicans together to make some of the largest investments in infrastructure in more than half a century, brought Democrats and Republicans together to address the national security risk around TikTok. So I think when you judge him based on substance rather than narrative, I think he deserves re-election.
Let me ask you about that big rally that President Trump had a couple of weeks ago in your district. It's a very diverse district. A lot of folks showed up. We talked to some of them out there. One gentleman, William Rivers, says, you are taking everything from blacks and browns everywhere. It's Hispanics or the other people who don't have a lot. You're taking it and giving it to the illegal aliens, which is totally wrong. He talked about why he was attending this. We have many other similar statements from folks. Why do you think your constituency is moving, and poll numbers show us, too, that Hispanic and black voters are moving to President Trump in a way they didn't in 2020?
Well, first, the Bronx is going to overwhelmingly vote for President Biden, despite a few anecdotes.
We would be shocked if it were otherwise.
But, you know, the Latino vote has never been a monolith. I mean, in 2000, George W. Bush won 40% of the Latino vote. You know, Puerto Ricans and Dominicans in the South Bronx are different from Cubans and Venezuelans in Florida, who are different from Mexicans in California, who are different from Mexicans in South Texas. So the Latino vote has been a bipartisan vote for a long time, and despite what the polls say, we should be campaigning as if we're 10 or 20 points behind. We should never take any constituency for granted. We should campaign for every single vote.
That's always good advice for any campaign. Despite any polls, be fighting for every single vote. Congressman, thank you for making the time to come in.
Happy to be here.
Appreciate it.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.